afternoon, everybody. I think we'll get going. We've got quite a few attendees here. So welcome to everyone today. My name is Gavin May. I'm the Head of Sales here at Trident. I'd like to thank you all for joining this forum today. I know that your time is precious and we really appreciate your attendance. So hopefully you've all got your Uber Eats voucher and you have ordered something tasty. We've just had ours. We have a great agenda this afternoon, which Katie will go through shortly. We want this to be a really interactive session. We have some great speakers here with Graham Samuel, Tim Rowler and Rahul Kohli, and they've all asked for this to be interactive. So please, if you've got any questions, down the bottom here, there is a little Q&A button that you can press, and you can ask those questions there. And Katie, who will be our MC, will relay that through to these presenters. Also, we have some quizzes going on during the session, which Jeff will jump in. Again, I think there's a little bit there to raise your hand. When you know the answer, just raise your hand and hopefully there'll be a good prize coming towards some of you. I'd like to thank HPE Finance for sponsoring this event. We couldn't have done that without them, so I really appreciate that. We're going to run a really tight ship today. We're a little bit behind, but I'm going to hand over very quickly. We aim to finish this by 2:30, and we're hoping that this will be the first of many events like this that we have for you guys. So without further ado, let me introduce our MC for this afternoon, the CEO of Trident Technology Solutions, Katie Bentley.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I know it's all a little strange with this pandemic, Uber Eats vouchers, being allowed to have a glass of wine at 1 o'clock on a Friday and not having to worry about drive home. No one can see you, so you can do whatever you like at your desk right now. We're going to start off with a little game. I'm going to introduce the lovely Jeff Bentley, who is our Chief Sales Officer, and here's a range of questions to ask, and there's some very, very good bottles of wine to win. Jeff, welcome.
Thanks, Katie. Well, you're better off starting these events with a little bit of fun. So I've got 4 questions to ask. They're very simple, and whoever gets it right, the first wins a lovely bottle of rosé. Question 1, the theme is round out, who am I? Question 1, which of our notable speakers was once the AFL Commissioner? Hand up.
Put up my hand.
Yes, correct, Graham Samuel. Question 2, which one of our notable speakers was once managed a professional cycling team and operated a gluten-free bakery?
Waiting, actually, Ross.
Waiting.
We saw your answer to the last one, so I think you were.
Ross, well done, Ross. Correct. Question 3, what does the E stand in HP Finance? I heard that, Gav. Correct, enterprise. Well done, Jennifer Dean. And the last question, finish this sentence. One of our notable speakers has spirit and... Correct, Ian Foster. So, well done. Thanks for playing and good luck.
Thank you. So to all of you, we'll send out a bottle of wine. Now, I'm going to introduce our next speaker. He is Professor Graham Samuel AC. We're very, very lucky to have him. He's very widely wanted, particularly at this time of the pandemic. His intellectual expertise and his knowledge on the economic climate are quite important, and we're very lucky to have him. He's a fellow at Monash University's Business School and School of Public Health and Preventative Medicine. He's the President of Dementia Australia. He's the Chair of Capability Review of the Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority. He's a member of the panel which conducted the governance review of the CBA. And he's going to talk to us about the economic outlook after the pandemic. Graham, welcome.
Thanks, Katie. And look, thanks everyone for joining in on this webinar. Every morning I get up very early, 5 o'clock or thereabouts, and I download onto my iPad a range of newspapers, the Australian fundamental ones that I think are important, the Financial Review, the Age and the Australian. But then I also download the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post and the UK London Times. Now I do that for a reason, as well as getting, I'm a bit of a news junkie, but I also get a lot of the information from Apple News and Google News and the like. And I do it for a reason, because, you know, when I see what's happened in Australia in dealing with both the health issues of COVID-19 and what's been happening particularly in the UK and the United States, I feel really good. I do feel really good. And I feel really good about the economic prospects for Australia relative to the UK and the United States in particular, when I read what's happening over there. I think we've been extremely lucky. We've had a leadership from both the national government but also the national cabinet, which has seen us through the pandemic, at least stage one of the process at the moment, because we'll come to second waves and third waves, and I'll discuss that very briefly in a moment. But we've been through the first wave in a way that I think has set an example for the world, probably only equalled by New Zealand if you take infection rates and death rates on a per capita basis. We have done extraordinarily well, and we ought to be very thankful to our national leaders for the way that's been handled, and very appreciative of the way that they've done it. Also for our medical officers. And look, they have done so in the face of some extraordinary criticism and proposals as to what they ought to do coming from certain sections of the media. And I'm highly critical of certain people, and I'm going to name them because I might as well. I think Norman Swan ought to go back into hibernation, frankly. He's quoted as a sort of the go-to expert. Well, the only thing I'd say about Norman is that he started off with a lot of nonsense, and fortunately he went into hibernation, and then has come out again, and he started to adopt what the medical experts have told us. Bill Botel claimed to fame that he was involved in the HIV issues that we dealt with 2 decades ago. He's fortunately gone into hibernation now, and you never hear of him again, because they were all fundamentally wrong. The medical experts in Australia got it right, the chief medical officers, and the steps that were taken by the National Cabinet have been, I think, step perfect. So, let's be very thankful as to that. Economically, I have to say to you, I think the National Government has actually done exactly the right thing at the moment, and there is nothing that they've done that I could complain about or say is wrong. And what I'm going to do, I think, is illustrate how I think that we're actually going to come out of this economically a lot better than some of the doomsayers and the panic merchants in the media would have us believe. Now, I want to quickly illustrate those panic merchants because I think it's really important that we start to build up a defensive wall against them and negate them in every way we possibly can. The Australian had a headline about 3 weeks ago, some of you might remember it, Echoes of the Great Depression. And they had a photograph underneath of the lineup outside Centrelink. And I thought, oh crikey, why are they doing that? And it was made all the more ironic because down the bottom of the page was a promo paragraph of an article inside by Dennis Shanahan, who noted that the biggest risk to our economic well-being was the panic and fear engendered by media headlines and commentators. Seems to me that the irony of all that must have escaped the sub-editor when he was structuring the layout of that front page. An SBS financial commentator announced breathlessly that we're heading towards unemployment of 10%. Yes, he may be right, but I'll illustrate that's not the first time this has occurred, nor is it in anything like as serious as it's been in previous recessions. There was a headline in one newspaper that there'd been a 30% decline in property sales, with the wording suggesting there was 30% decline in property values. No, it wasn't. It was a decline in auctions, and no wonder because auctions had actually been forbidden, and therefore vendors had withdrawn at the time. So, there's all this sort of thing that's going on. I've been involved with Virgin and the airlines, and I was staggered to see the headlines that Virgin had collapsed. Very interesting, Virgin might have collapsed, but the administrators actually are now working towards the sale of the airline, and frankly, it was not a collapse at all. That just showed a complete ignorance on the part of those writing about it in the newspapers. Now, what we've got is, I think, an economic situation where we may be, and I want to underline those words, we may be heading for a recession. Now, you might be surprised about that I'm saying that we may be. The reason why I'm qualifying it with the words may be heading for a recession is that there are various definitions of a recession. A recession is technically described, and look, economists have all sorts of technical descriptions, but 2 quarters of GDP decline. I think it is unarguable that we will have a GDP decline in the June quarter, but there are many economists that are out there now saying, you know what, September might actually show us moving into positive GDP. If that happens, then technically, guys, we've not moved into a recession. Now, if that is the case, that will be a real eye-opener to a whole lot of people that are out there in the business community and particularly in the media who have been commenting upon this. The Reserve Bank has said that we are going to be hitting peak unemployment this year at about 10%, and that is heartbreaking for those who are unemployed. And there are various other factors to be built into that, including part-time, underemployment and people not seeking work. But they do indicate that that'll ease back to about 7% next year, which if you put that in the context of the relative full employment we had prior to this crisis, which was about 5.2 to 5.3%, is actually quite miraculous if we head back to that level of unemployment. And I think the best indicator of what will happen economically is going to be the unemployment rate. Let me point out, by the way, that in previous recessions, 1933-34 recession, post the Great Depression, unemployment hit, or it was part of the Great Depression, unemployment hit 19%. In 1983, we hit 10.5% and then took 3 years to bring it down to around 8.2. Remember I said RBA, the Reserve Bank is saying 10% this year, back to around 7% next year. 1992 to 93, the recession we had to have, 11.2%, then 3 years to bring it down to 8.3. So if the respected commentators, and I say the respected ones, are correct, then we will see unemployment at serious but not catastrophic levels as we proceed through 2020 and into 2021.
Graham, can I interrupt you for a minute? And remember everyone, Graham really wants his presentation to be very interactive, so you're more than welcome to post some questions. I'm going to ask you a question, Graham. Often at the end of any of these types of recessions, new types of roles come around, and the vast majority of listeners today are in the technology business,
yep,
whether that be in education or in corporate. Tell me a little bit about any new types of jobs or skills that might be required post-pandemic.
All right, can I defer that for 2 minutes because I'm going to come to that, Katie, and
Sure.
that's absolutely fundamental, I think, to what will happen. So I think the economy is likely to rebound a lot more quickly than people have been expecting. What we have been having is the government originally announced its so-called stimulus package. It was its saviour package, predicated on a 6-month lockdown. Looks like that lockdown is more like 7 to 8 weeks. And therefore, a whole lot of the predictions and forecasts that were made by some commentators are going to be well out by many percentages, particularly because the lockdown has moved out of lockdown into easing of restrictions a lot more quickly than we thought. So I don't think we're going to spend all of the government's announced stimulus package. And for those that want us to keep in place JobKeeper and the like right through till September, I just don't think they understand the realities of what we do to manage this economy properly, and they should really back off and allow the economists, and in particular the Treasurer and the Prime Minister, to direct the way that this goes. We've got to remember this about this recession. This is a bit different to many other recessions we've had. In fact, it's the first that I can recall. I was going to say in the past century. Of course, I can't recall them in the past century, but of recent times. And there's a reason for this, because most recessions are demand driven. They're driven by a structural problem that causes consumers to cease to demand products. And when they do that, then gross domestic product falls, consumer confidence has fallen, business confidence falls, etc. This actually is a supply-driven contraction. The government actually turned off the supply tap because it said for COVID-19 lockdown, you've got to stop your businesses operating. And it's within the power of government, as we've already seen in the past week or so, to turn that tap back on. So it's a different sort of contraction to that we've seen in the past. It's not demand driven. It will be in part, obviously because of what's happened, particularly in the unemployment area, but largely it's supply driven. And that means that affected industries can come back relatively quickly. So I've got every confidence that the government will get the recovery settings right. We'll go through some pain, and at times uncertainty will rattle us. But if you look at, for example, I was talking to John Fraser, former Secretary of Treasury. He's the director of Judo Bank, which lends money to small business. You'd have thought that'd be the most vulnerable one of all. They've raised $770 million in the last 3 rounds of capital raising, with the last raising valuing the company at over $1 billion. So they clearly got confidence in lending to small business. I could go through the big banks, we'll talk about that a bit later on. So we're going to have a contraction, and the headlines and the TV news will constantly remind us of that. With all the panic and fear that publishers can muster, after all, it's the catastrophes that sell news far more than hope and company information. What is going to set this recovery back? Well, the principal factors, I think, will be these. A second wave of infections caused by the stupidity of some in not observing the gradual easing of restrictions, and that's always a risk, and we'll see that happen, I think, as people become complacent. Fear and panic induced by an irresponsible media, and look, using the words irresponsible media is probably a tautology. They are intent on engaging readers and viewers by headlines and commentaries of catastrophe rather than objective analyses of reality. That will change the supply-induced contraction that I talked of before to a demand-induced recession caused by fear and panic. And then, unfortunately, and we've seen this already, the narrow-minded attitude of certain state premiers in keeping their borders closed to travellers, contrary to all the medical advice that's coming from the medical experts around the central health advisory group that the National Cabinet's put together. I just absolutely shook my head in dismay at the comments made by the Queensland Premier the other night on TV when she said, "I put the interests of Queenslanders first. That is my job." No, madam, your job is to actually lead the nation generally and to be part of a broad leadership of the nation. So I think all these are likely and in fact inevitable, and have placed an enormous burden on our national leaders and everyone that's party to this webinar and elsewhere to counter the stupidity that is going to be out there. What do we do? And I should say, by the way, if we all despair, the recovery will take so much longer and far more painful. Now, there are going to be changes. And this is the interesting part of this, getting to the issue that you raised, Katie. I think we're going to move much more to flexible hours and to shifts. We won't have everyone coming in at 9 and leaving at 5, as the case may be. There'll be a lot more flexibility. We're already encountering that at the moment, particularly with working at home or working away from the office. I see New Zealand, actually, the New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, even contemplated 4-day working weeks. Now, you might think that that's slacking off. No, actually, what she's doing is she's saying the available work that's there could be shared amongst more people if everyone reduced their working week to 4 days, with an appropriate reduction, obviously, in remuneration, but it spreads the available productive resources of the nation amongst many more people. And so that's one of the things being floated around. Work at home will focus on productivity rather than time in the office. This is a really important element. Outcomes-based management and incentives will be far more important. See, you don't have to be in the office to actually produce what your employer wants you to produce. And the employer will judge you on what you are producing rather than the number of hours you spend in the office, whether it's in your office itself or at your desk or at the coffee machine getting coffee. More people will be employed, but for less hours. That reduces underemployment and it puts purchasing power in the hands of more people. We'll reorganise the deployment of labour around continually improved new systems of production, distribution and exchange. There are going to be vast changes, changed office conditions, less demand for office space. I'm a director of a company that's involved in health technology, and they've already advised their landlord that in June, they will be reducing their office space by 60%. Because more and more of their technical people will be working from home or elsewhere, and they're saying that their rental is going to be reduced by 70%. The landlord says, well, what do I do? I said, take it or leave it, because there are plenty of spots around. So I wouldn't like to be an office landlord in the foreseeable future. They're all saying, of course, speaking their own book, that people will be coming back to the office. I don't think that's right. I think that this is, people are adjusting to a new way of working and of being productive. Changes in business strategies. And look, from your basic restaurant, and I was talking to a colleague today who's lives in Albert Park, and he was talking to some cafe owners down in Albert Park, and they're saying, we're actually earning more money by takeaway, and by takeaway coffee in particular, than we have by having people sit in. we may actually change our business strategy to do just that. Online shopping with delivery and click and collect, rather than having salespeople roaming the floor, is going to become more relevant. But to do so, you'll have to adjust the way that you sell your product online. It won't be a case of just putting a picture up there of the price. It'll be actually persuading the customer that this is something you should buy. And we know those who do it well and those that don't. And as someone who has been an early adopter of online and click and collect, I've moved away from the sites that are not there telling me all I really want to know about a particular product towards the sites that will. More sophisticated websites selling products with relevant information is going to be really important. Education. Now, this might provoke a bit of commentary, Katie, but see, I think for more senior students, it is possible to have more online rather than attendance at school. Now, educators will rail against that, but I spent some time, 8 years, on the ANU Council, the Australian National University Council. And we talked a lot about online. I was a big advocate of online because I could see hundreds of millions of dollars going into buildings and saying, but hold on, this has got very serious constraints. It's got constraints on the level of international students that you can bring in, because you've got to bring them into Australia, into Canberra, and you've got to house them and their costs, etc. But it's got other constraints because it limits the sources of academic excellence that you can pick up throughout the world to be able to educate your students. The problem was not the students, it was the academics. The problem, I think, is a lot not the students, it's the teachers. They have great difficulty in adjusting to a new mode of teaching. You know, Katie, we got this webinar, and you know, I've participated in many Zoom teleconferences over the past few weeks. Sometimes they're up to 40 participants, and I can see them all on the screen. And you know, I find it relatively easy to do. And you know, I can interact with the participants. I had one bit of fun with one participant the other day. I'm doing this environment review, and I put forward a proposition, and I saw her look towards the ceiling. I said, Jess, are your notes up there on the ceiling, or are you thinking? And she laughed. And it's that sort of interaction that you can have if you're smart. But what we found at the ANU was that the academics were highly resistant to doing things differently, the way that, you know, to adjusting. We did attend one particular session. It was fascinating. A guy who teaches Sanskrit, and he had 20 people up on his screen. He was sitting in a room on his own, 20 people up on the screen, ranging from Ballarat to Melbourne, to India, to London, to the United States, etc., all over the place. And he was conducting a superb lecture. It wasn't a lecture, it was an interactive, dynamic learning experience with those people. And that was one of the only ones we could actually foster out of the ANU who really adopted the whole process of online. So I think online is going to become something with the technology we've now got available, and even with the somewhat inhibited NBN that we have got at the moment, but I can talk about that. But for greater international students and academics to be connected. A very quick final comment, which is about China. You know, look, we were warned about this, yeah, and for those like my late father who was in the rag trade and had as his major customer Myer, and then Myer cancelled the whole of the order at one stage the night before it was due to be delivered. He came home crying. I said, Dad, why do you get yourself in the position where you're so reliant on one customer? Now, we were warned about this. Paul Keating warned us about it a long time ago and said, start diversifying. You've got India, you've got Indonesia, you've got a range of other Southeast Asian countries that you ought to be focusing on. Stop simply focusing on China. But we didn't do it, we were lazy. Iron ore, now this tells you, look, this will tell you, I'm jumping around a bit, but iron ore is fascinating. Yesterday, China made an announcement about iron ore. And this morning on ABC, Madeline asked James Kirby, their go-to economics commentator, to comment upon the iron ore statement. Well, he went on for 3 or 4 minutes about how dangerous it was, and has to be seen in the context of what's happened with barley and with meat. I thought, James, you idiot, you actually haven't focused on the fact that the iron ore suppliers in Australia are welcoming the Chinese move, because what it's doing is taking away compulsory checks of every iron ore shipment, and leaving it now up to buyers to decide if they want a particular shipment to be checked or not. They're actually saying it's a good thing, it's a good move by China. We need to recognise that China needs our iron ore because the only other source is Brazil, Vale in Brazil, and they are not a reliable supplier. Barley, yeah, a lot of people would like to ascribe it to what has happened more recently with Scott Morrison and Maurice Payne adopting a leadership role on the independent inquiry. Frankly, the facts do not support that. Barley was the subject of long debate for about the past 18 months, and the barley and meat issues are a bit of retaliation for, I think, the inappropriate use by Australian steel manufacturers of anti-dumping processes that we have here, something that when I was back with the ACCC, we railed against heavily, but it's been let to go. And so I don't blame China in one sense for what they've done in that area, but you know, it's an issue, and of course it'll be blown up as a retaliation for the role that we took in respect of the independent inquiry. China and India, sorry.
I've got some questions online, if it's okay if I ask you those.
I'll just finish with one final thing, and then I'm done. International students at universities and Chinese students in particular, I got to say to you, I've got little sympathy for the universities. They were warned 3 years ago not to rely on heavy, on one particular location. They ignored it with 2 exceptions in Victoria, RMIT and Deakin, because the G of 8, the group of 8 universities had focused on the bulk of Chinese students. They actually focused their attention on India, and they've got very heavy Indian students amongst their international students. The G of 8 focused on China. It was easy, and they said nothing will ever happen to it. Well, they've been proven to be wrong, and I don't have a great deal of sympathy. Right, I'll shut up.
All right, Graham, I've got some questions just going back to what you were saying about the cross borders and the Queensland Premier.
Yeah.
One of our people is asking, what do you see as the short to medium term prospects for boarding schools? Already some of their cross-border students are not returning.
Yeah. Look, the problem I think with boarding schools is that and look, I've never been to a boarding school. I was at Wesley, and I know Wesley has just built its boarding school out at Glen Waverley. It's the clustering together. It's the, I don't like to use the word clustering. I shouldn't have used that because it reminds us of the clusters, the meatworks and aged care homes, but it imposes an enormous responsibility on the schools that are managing boarding schools to try and avoid that cluster that has occurred in various aged care homes and the like. Now, good luck to you if you want to take that responsibility on, but it's one of those things where personally, because of the legal responsibility and the moral responsibility, I would be more focusing on my boarding students being taught online than necessarily bringing them back into boarding schools themselves. The whole concept of living together, dormitories, eating together in I call them mess halls, I don't know if they call them anymore, in dining rooms, is something that is really difficult to manage in the context of social distancing and the protection against the clusters.
Okay. Graham, I've got another one. This is from Andrew at St Pat's in Ballarat. Talking about some of the skills post-pandemic, you spoke about your love of online learning and how you've tried to push that. He's asking, what about replacement teachers online? So he's saying that the best maths teacher for methods, year 12, might be in Queensland. He's based in Ballarat. How can we start to do that?
Well, see, this is the great beauty of online. And when I go back to my university experience, and I used to say to them, but it was like batting your head up against a brick wall. Hey, I think there's a reason for this, which I explain. If you want to get the very best academics, then you don't only have to rely on Australia, you can actually have a look at Harvard, you can have a look at the London School of Economics, and you can actually tap into them, and they can be there to provide lectures and tutorials, and you can get some extraordinary resources by doing it that way. Of course, that introduces competition into the learning module. And that starts to worry people, because the beauty of online is that accessibility is enhanced so much more than what we have by physical presence. Now, that's not to deny the value of physical presence, but I wouldn't like, we talk about boarding, I wouldn't like to be actually managing the halls of residence at various universities at the moment. where they've got to manage, again, the prospect of a cluster developing, and you only need one student to come in or an academic to come in with an infection, and then it can race through the whole student population of that particular hall of residence, as the case may be. ANU is very dependent on that. You know, other University of Melbourne, you know, has the same thing, as does Monash and others in Melbourne. And so there are issues there I think you have to deal with. But think of, you know, the method that we're adopting today gives the group of us that are part of this panel the ability to communicate with 45 participants, you know, at one time. You know, if you wanted to open up the Zoom to a normal participant type Zoom, Katie, I could be seeing everyone and seeing their grimaces as I make various comments, and the smiles and the nods and everything else, and people putting up their hand to say, I want to answer a question. Or, I mean, it is remarkable what you can do if you adjust to it. And look at my age, and I'm a lot older than a whole lot of people around the table, I expect. You know, I've managed to adjust to it really well. And I have to say that you know, people say to me, gee, you must be finding it hard working at home. I got to tell you, compared to all the travel that I was doing December, January, October, November last year in this environment review, I can do so much more work just by using Zoom and you know, communicating in the way that we're doing today.
Beautiful. And of course, you've finished your renovation on your beautiful home now, so you've actually got some time to enjoy it.
Exactly.
Now tell me, I've got another question for you. Who, in your view, has been a standout leader in all of this? And I know you've spoken a little bit. Tell us a little bit about what you think about Dan Andrews' slightly different stance to the other premiers. Yeah. And tell us why in South Australia the restaurants are open but you're not allowed to be served alcohol.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm not sure about the last one because I saw some comment on ABC this morning, but I basically turned off ABC. I'm watching SBS now. Couldn't be bothered with it all. It's got really poor. Amongst our leaders, I'll say this. I've got a lot of admiration for the Prime Minister and for the Treasurer and for the Health Minister. The three of them have done outstanding leadership. Amongst the state premiers, I got a lot of time for Dan Andrews. Look, I know Dan you know, held back a bit on easing of restrictions, but if truth be known, he actually eased the restrictions in Victoria further than most. You recall that what he did was, the only criticism I've got is that his timing of the announcement, he let things get away from him a little bit, in the sense that he said, I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to do until Monday, whereas others had done on Friday. But what he did was he said, on Monday, I'm easing restrictions starting from Wednesday. So he was ahead of some of the other states. And he's also not overbaking this appearance on TV, you know, with these press conferences and all. He's getting out there when there are things to be said, and not getting out there when there's nothing to be said. I'm a bit irritable, I have to say, with New South Wales Premier, who every morning at 8 o'clock gets out there to announce absolutely sweet nothing, and you know, repeats it 5 times just in case you didn't hear the nothing the first time round, and then gets Kerry Chant on there to tell you the latest statistics that they've had 1 more or 2 more, whatever it might be. So I'm irritable at her. You'll gather I'm irritable about the Queensland Premier, and same with WA and South Australia and Tasmania for not opening up their state borders. It just seems to me to be absolutely ludicrous that they're taking us back to 1899 and 1900 before Federation. And you know, this just doesn't make sense to me. We are a single nation, for heaven's sake. You know, in the end, I think it'll hit them hard, because there'll be a lot of people in those states that'll say, what the hell is going on? Why are you adopting this position that you're stopping people coming, you know, to Kangaroo Island or to the Gold Coast or the Sunshine Coast, whatever it is? We rely on it as part of our business. And I think that's going to have its own impact. So I had a lot of time for Dan Andrews. I think he's done a good job. Yeah, with some exceptions where I get a bit irritable because he delays things too long. And I think there's a bit of politics involved in all that, as they all do. But he's fortunate he hasn't got an election coming up for, 2 or 3 years. Whereas some of these other states, the premiers, I think are behaving a bit like Trump. They're putting their election issues a bit before that of the public interest.
Well, Graham, thank you. We're just so lucky to have someone of your calibre speak to us over Uber Eats. I'm going to keep you on because we're going to introduce our next speaker, but I've got quite a few more questions that I might bring up with you later on.
Yep.
So our next speaker is the very lovely Tim Rowler, the business manager at Loreto Mandeville Hall. He looks so young to have such a role, but he's actually incredibly intelligent, and I've really enjoyed working with him. He's someone who is always looking for continuous improvement. And the backdrop that he has on his screen right now is actually Loreto Mandeville Hall. That's not something of a slide from Teams. He's also president of the Catholic Education Business Administrators, which represents over 250 senior education administrators in Australia. And he's going to talk about the steps Loreto have put in place over this pandemic. And one of the things I'd like you to also maybe talk about, Tim, is if we are moving to more online learning, how are private schools and public schools going to differentiate themselves? So I think that's quite important, given that Loreto is an expensive school to go to. If we're moving to online, what are you going to give our students differently that a public school could? And I think that's something that we all probably need to have a think about. So over to you, Tim.
Thanks, Katie, and thanks to Graham too. That was really interesting hearing from him, and many of the things that he mentioned there I'll intersect with and talk about further as well. I think it's probably important to just to note we do have a long-term partnership here with Loreto, with Trident and Neptune. And always surprised when Katie or Jeff ask me to speak, given those that know me know how honest and brutally honest I can be at times. But today I'm going to go over, like Katie said, a couple of key things. I'll be talking for the next 10 or 15 minutes. I'm more than happy for people to interrupt, ask questions along the way. And I'll cover off, I guess, originally an overview of what occurred for us at the commencement, what remote learnings looked like, and then I'll finish with those changes going forward and the things that we can offer that some of the other schools maybe can either take up or that may not be able to, given the circumstances that they now face. The overview for us was that we'd already started talking about COVID-19 or coronavirus at our planning day in January. And we had thought about a lot of the other scenarios, but none of us, like certainly not here, and I think like most of you out there, you hadn't probably considered that it would be as bad as what we've now lived through in the last period of time. One of the things we had agreed on was that if we were to have a case here, we would shut the whole school. We'd looked at whether or not we thought we could contain it within an area and say if it was only in the business office, do we need to shut the whole school? But we agreed that from the beginning, with the amount of interaction across the school, we had no way to separate that. And that's one of our key focuses with students and staff returning over the last few weeks, and then moving forward into next week when we have students coming back, is how we can actually contain that. We're taking a little bit of an AFL approach in trying to keep people in hubs, and that'll be a key focus that I'll come back to towards the end of today. So we had decided that, and that's when back on the 15th of March, we had a phone call from a parent. It was a Sunday. They called us at about 11:30 in the morning just to say, I'm sure I'm not the first one to call and let you know, but I've just tested positive for coronavirus. And shock horror sort of came through when he first spoke to the principal, who then subsequently called me. And no, he was the first. And not only that, he'd done a great job. He'd visited our performance just 2 days earlier, where we had about 100 students performing off-site, thankfully. So hadn't visited the school, but his daughter had been at the school as well. And so we called our critical incident management team together, and that was our leadership team. We all came in on the Sunday. I'll share a photo of that. It's quite a funny little photo of us in there on the Sunday. But to start with, it was actually me calling the Department of Health, who were actually quite helpful. Went through the steps as to what we were obliged to do and what we didn't have to do. And then the school really had a decision to make. Should we close the school? Should we close a section of the school? We came back to the fact that we'd already agreed that if we had a case, we would close the school. And what we decided is that although we didn't have a case in anyone who had actually visited our school, we did have one in that close community, and that student was now being tested. Without a result for that student for at least 24 hours, we decided to close the school and give ourselves a day. Much like what Kerry had actually done, looking at what other schools had done and what other organisations had done really helped us. And so when we did all come together on that Sunday, we set ourselves up in our business office, in our meeting room there, and got into the snack pack of what was from the cafe as we sat together and looked at what are we going to do, how are we going to communicate this to our families, and what does tomorrow look like. So once we'd agreed that we were going to close the school for a 1 day and work out what to do, it made it much easier. We used our comms plans, our comms strategies to communicate out to our parents, our staff, and our students. We also had to consider other stakeholders. We had spoken to the chair of the board to ensure that he was in agreement with us to close the school for the day, and then give ourselves 24 hours basically to think about what this meant for us as a school. We had also spoken to some of other key relationships with contractors, consultants, getting the message out to them, and also looking at some of our close neighbours' schools. And I know I saw some of the participants list. You would have all got a text message from me the Sunday afternoon to say that we were going to be doing that. One of the things that we realised very, very quickly was just how big a story this was. We sent out a message to our parents at about 4:30, maybe even 5 o'clock on the Sunday. And by, you can see here at, by 5:30, someone had posted the Age had posted a message, and Channel 10 was on site at the front of the school as well. So the media really jumped onto this very, very quickly. And it was something that we expected to occur on the Monday, but we didn't realise it'd be such a big story on the Sunday. And the speed at which they did that was incredible as well. So then we came to Monday. We added our risk and compliance manager and our school nurse. We already had a student-free day planned for Wednesday. So the decision really was, do we come back for 1 day only to have the students go away again? And we decided that no, we would actually keep everybody away, focus on training our staff, and move to a remote learning platform. For us, the remote learning platform was Microsoft Teams. We'd already decided that for years 11 and 12s that we would do that. And we'd commenced on the Sunday and into Monday making Teams for years 11s and 12s. So day one, we were up and running with year 11 and 12 subjects after a short training session with our staff. At this time, we were very thankful for a couple of key things. One of them was that we were a Microsoft tune-up school. So we'd actually participated with Microsoft in the training and undergone upskilling of some key faculties. So we had 2 of our faculties already using Teams extensively, but we weren't using Teams at all with our students. So we had to come up with a way to quickly roll that out and pass that on to our teachers and to our students. So the students were able to pick it up very quickly, but the staff are obviously something that it's a big change for them. And I'd say that's probably the #1 opportunity for us has been the speed at which we can roll out things to our staff. We've forced the change with technology. We've forced them to adopt and use this technology. And it's something that I think you'd often find in schools that there's a lot of pushback on, and there's a lot of excuses as to why they can't do it, or they are going to do that roll something out over a 12-month period. And so we actually had a rollout plan for Teams, and instead of rolling out over 3 terms, we rolled it out in 3 days. And so we literally took term 1, 1 day, term 2 the next day, term 3 the following one, which was, so by the end of that week, we had Microsoft Teams set up for each of our year levels from 7 to 12. And then the following week, we rolled it out for years 5 and 6. And then finally, over the term break, we rolled it out for the junior school as well, for the remainder of the junior school. So it was a very interesting times for us. There was a couple of other things we were really thankful for too. We had early communications with our suppliers who really assisted us, Trident being one of our key ones. We geared up our response there with additional staff helping out, rolling out Microsoft Teams. But it was really all hands on deck. Even myself was sitting there trying to work out how to put together the subject list and assist in adding teams because we had all of that training going on. We really were stretched to the limits there. But our communications went well, our planning went well, and both our leadership, our board, our parents and our students all responded. But particularly our suppliers, everyone that we called, they were quick to respond to and really did step up and assist us. There was another thing we were very thankful for too, which was we'd gone through a lot of work in the previous 12 months with Trident, looking at our disaster recovery plan and our backups and how we were going to do that. And we established a disaster recovery plan that included an offsite centre at NextDC and servers. But one of the things we did talk about at that stage, but we never considered, was that the students would be offsite. In fact, our entire plan was built around the fact that they would access our learning management from on-site. and our learning management system was on site as well. And we really struggled with that connection early days. We only had a very small 50 meg link upload to our learning management system from outside the school. And so early days, we moved that across to another connection we had, which was a 100 meg link. And then we subsequently, in the days that followed, moved it across to a 400 meg link. We were still having issues with that though. And it was about at this time that I was due to have my meeting with Sol following the purchase of Trident and Neptune by Spirit Telecom. And it was at that meeting that Sol offered us a 1000 meg link to the school, and through a wireless platform, which was even better. It was something that we had considered for a long period of time, upgrading our existing connections, but through delays, costs, and the fact that a cable connection would be taking 2 to 3 months, we'd held off making that decision. Sol was able to give us an offer of installing that within 5 days if we went ahead on by the end of that day, which I did by the end of that meeting, said yes, please do it. And so 5 days later, we had a 1000 meg link, which was through a wireless link as well to the school. So, and it was delivered on time according to the budget that Sol had provided, and it was a huge relief for us that we could get such a connection done when we were getting quotes of 2 to 3 months and no guarantees from our cable providers. And that was one of the other big things for us, is moving forward with that. So then we looked at what does homeschooling look like for us. So as I said, we did roll out teams in stages. Year 11s and 12s were moving to teams straight away and having class time according to their timetables. 7 to 10 we rolled out a few days later. And then we added years 5s to 12s. And we added sport programs by the end of the week. We added music lessons by the end of the week too, noting that many schools took that approach while other schools seemed to take a different approach to closing down music lessons. We took the approach that we wanted to continue everything that we were offering at school, but in a remote environment. Of course, there's some things that did have to go by the wayside. We were unable to do swimming training, but we did offer other training programs they could do at home. So we really did push for that. And I think some of those we'll see coming forward into the future as well. The other thing we did is we looked at all of our programs and really focused on what we were missing out on and how we could go about that, with a focus that we would try to get through those first 2 weeks. We had 2 weeks prior to the end of term, and noting that when Dan Andrews decided to add those curriculum days, we didn't take up those days, we just pushed through. We were already remote learning, and we decided we would effectively, we saw it as money in the bank or teaching in the bank, so we used those days right up until that end of term and kept to the normal timelines. And we had a real focus that leaving to the end of term, our staff in particular knew what they were going to deliver coming back from term 3. So there were no surprises as to how they were going to teach remotely, no pressure that they had to worry about as to how they were going to deliver. They knew how they were going to do it. It was just a matter of preparing their content. Separate to that, we had an entirely other side of things, which was our finances and our business operations. And so we'd set up board meetings right from the beginning, which was every week on a Friday. We set up a weekly board update. And on the second week, we brought in our finance committee and had a finance committee meeting as well remotely. And so we realized straight away that our parents would be suffering during this and that it would be a substantial change to their circumstances. And so together with our board, we met and we put together an offer and subsequently sent a letter to our parents on the 3rd of April. Rather, we thought it was quite quick, and I think we're one of the first schools to come out with an offer to our parents. Hopefully we didn't put too much pressure on our other schools around by doing that, but what we did is we put forward 3 different things. The first one was we offered all parents an opportunity to take up a fee concession of 15% for term 2. And we made that as opt-in or opt-out. So they actually had to say to us they wanted to take that up. They didn't have to justify it at all. They just had to ask. And to date, we've had about 50% of our parents decide to take that up. Of the other 50% who haven't, most of them have indicated that they wanted to not take that up, and they knew that not doing that would actually assist us in providing additional assistance to other members of our community and our families, and particularly around bursary assistance. The second item that we offered all parents was an ability to defer for their fees for the next 3 months or for that term, and it was dependent upon how they were paying. We offer either annually in advance, monthly over 10 months, or per term basis. So we had our monthly payments coming through, and we have had quite a few parents decide to defer for those 3 months. We're in our second month of deferrals now in May, and next month will be the final deferral. Be interesting to see how quickly we can catch that up. And so we have seen our debtors extend and a little bit, but overall we're still tracking very well. We're lucky, we're in a very strong position from a cash point of view, so we didn't have to have any hard discussions with our banks as yet, but we are also in the process of a large building project, which I'll touch on shortly. And the third item that we offered our parents was if those that were suffering significant financial hardship, they had a direct line to me and via an email, they could put forward a form, very simple, one pager, basically to say that they are suffering significant financial hardship. And then I spoke to each and every one of them in person. And from that, we were able to offer some additional bursary assistance or special arrangements for them to make payments or delay. For the most part, that's quite interesting. It wasn't really families that you might consider are usually struggling. It was parents that might have big incomes and they might be doctors or dentists. But what they were doing is they had their income come from very high to very low very quickly, very limited disposable income. And so they were unable to meet their financial obligations outside of the school and also for the school. So for the most part, that involved them taking up a deferral. And then in some cases where they've had a total loss of income and it looked like their income was going to be lost for a significant period of time, we were able to offer them some bursary assistance. So we got that out quickly, and that was really key for us, is getting it out to the community as assistance straight away. We then looked at our other operations, and together, Principal and I were able to look at what this impact would have on the school, and obviously a significant cost for those bursaries and that financial assistance and that fee assistance of the discount that we offered. We had things like JobKeeper in the background with limited information, rules keep changing every minute. And so we really had to look at the school and actually take up some savings that we could straight away, which involved reducing casual hours to, for the most part, nearly zero. We also had to make some savings. So whether it be functions or some other additional things that we might offer, we've cut back on. And we also held off a majority of our capital works going forward. There is a significant building though that we're undertaking at the moment. It's a 2-year build, and we only started at the start of this year. So for some people that may have seemed like a disaster, but for us it was actually quite lucky. We were at the stage of doing our basement works, and with that basement works being done, we had very limited number of staff or builders on site, workers on site. We had one contractor, and for the most part they were inside equipment, large equipment, so there was no issue with them in close proximity with each other. So we were able to continue those building works without any delay, which has been fantastic. The other side of it for us is really that teaching and learning, and something that I wanted to talk about now. I could stop for a second if there's any questions, Katie, before I go on to sort of what we've done.
No, I think I'll let you go on for a little while, Tim, and then we might give you a couple more minutes. I've got a couple of questions for you, but I think they might wait till the end after you've spoken about teaching and learning.
Yeah, great. So we were already recording some of our lessons prior to this through use of some learning management software and Edrollo, but we're obviously recording much more now, and we do see that as changing the dynamic in which we do teach. Graham touched on it earlier that there was that interaction in these types of meetings, which is key, and that's really what the teachers are going to want to have for their teachings. So rather than pre-recording classes and then posting content, for the most part, what we have been doing is recording classes where there's actual interaction with the students, so that those students that do miss out, they can tune back in at a later date and go over the content. But they can also go back, if they were there, and revisit the content that they weren't up to date on. So they can check that out. And I think that going forward will be a significant change. Outside of the classroom though, I think is where we're going to see a lot of different changes. Whether it be content that we were unable to deliver due to the timeline, things like astronomy club, I think that will now be remote forever, or certainly in a significant part. It's difficult to have students back at night, particularly really late, and then pickups, arrivals, all those sorts of things are difficult. Whereas we were able to offer an astronomy club through some of our teachers and technology with the telescopes and the like as well, where we could actually do things late at night, pre-record things as well. And there'll be lots of other clubs and activities that we would have liked to have done at school, but we just never had the time to do. I think some of those things will translate really well to online. in the first week, we actually had online debating, which worked extremely well. And I think that's another thing, that those types of activities where we can do things not just with our local schools, but right around the world and around the rest of Australia, we'll use more and more. There was
I
a
think that
question there
also,
too.
Tim, just lines up with what Graham was saying earlier about the possibilities of online learning. And one of our questions was about how a private school is going to differentiate themselves from public schools with online learning. That's a really good example. Tim, I've just got one question before I need to wrap you up. Someone's asked, one of the Melbourne schools, St Michael's, when they return next week, they've actually asked their students to wear sports uniform. So read this, it's a twofold reason. One is because it's much easier to wash, and allegedly the virus stays on fabric for 48 hours. And secondly, they feel that putting students into a straight uniform after being at home for this period of time would just be too much of a jolt for them. What are you doing at Loreto?
We're going to, next week, we've got students coming back just for assessments at VCE and some classes. So obviously no sport. We'll be starting back in winter uniform, but then we will be moving to a more flexible environment that gives them the choice actually for that, Katie. So where they do have PE or they have an activity on, then they will be able to wear sports uniform. So we are being much more flexible in that side of things. And I think that's probably the key for this whole thing. We've created a lot of flexibility for our students, our staff, and as Graham touched on earlier, we'll be seeing more flexibility in our working areas and working life as we probably allow people to work from home, something that we haven't really had much in education before, I think. So that'll be really interesting too.
Tim, I really loved hearing about what Loreto's done. I hope that you haven't stopped any gardeners to inhibit that beautiful backdrop.
No, clearly not. Have a look, Katie.
Absolutely.
Our
Have you
gardeners
been
have been
getting
here
into
the
the
whole time.
gardening as well with all those austerity measures that Loreto are putting in place? Is that your job as well now?
Well, we're in the middle of, with that building project, we've actually had a few big challenges this year. We've knocked down a third of our classrooms. So we actually have 2 year levels out of class at any one time throughout the day. So we have a longer day with a staggered lunch break, staggered arrival times, which now looks great because that's what the government's recommending. We already have that, thankfully. But as part of that, we had yard duty supervisors. So we actually had people permanently employed to supervise students on yard duty. So those employees have actually moved to become gardeners and maintenance staff over the last few months.
Well done.
So the grounds and buildings are looking better than they ever have. So we certainly haven't cut back on that.
Well done, Tim. Now, before I pass over to HP and Raoul, Tim, restaurants are open on June 1. You're only allowed to have 10 people. Which restaurant are you going to book first in Melbourne?
I'm already at Cafe Mandeville, which we've been open for the last few weeks.
You really needed to be in sales, Tim. Thank you so much,
Monday,
Tim.
Wednesday and Friday.
Really enjoyable. I enjoyed watching the backdrop as much as I did hearing from you. Now I'm going to move over to Raoul Coley, who's enabled all of this to happen. HPE Finance is a big supplier of ours. In fact, some of their finance deals are quite incredible at the moment with deferred payments and extremely low interest rates. Very, very easy to get some of these things across. Raoul's got a PowerPoint to share with us. So Raoul, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Well, thanks, Katie. I'll just share the screen here. Let's see if this all works. Is that coming live for you guys?
Well done.
Cool. Over hurdle 1. So thanks to the Trident and Spirit team, firstly, for giving me the opportunity to talk to all you guys on the call today. Not the usual way that I like to interact with my customers, but seems to be the new norm now, right now, with a lot of Zoom calls going on. So I think it's going to be like this for a little while. But it was great to hear from Graham, I guess, understanding what the outlook is post COVID-19, and just to get some insight around, I guess, some of the new ways of teaching that might be open to some of the schools on the call today. And it was actually really interesting to hear from Tim how they've, as a school, had to respond to some of those challenges, how they've helped their I guess, the students' parents of managing those fees as well coming through. So yeah, it's really, really good insight. I think kind of ties nicely into the conversation I want to have with the team here today, which is around, finding some options to address some of those economic challenges as well. I mean, we've all been bombarded with news 24/7 around what things are happening, how it's affecting people personally, how it's affecting people professionally, other countries. But the community on the webinar here today, being that education community, I guess it's really been there's been a lot of uncertainty from the government around what things are happening, and you guys have had to respond really quickly. So I just want to commend all you guys for being able to do that. And, you know, I can only imagine how challenging that's been for you. You know, things that we're hearing from our customers, you know, personally, I'm operating in both the commercial and education sector. So, you know, things I'm hearing from my customers is mainly around how they can conserve some of that cash. You know, they're exploring alternate lines of funding and different ways to do things. And, you know, there's a big spotlight on technology and IT right now to enable those dynamic work from home, learn from home type approaches as well. So, you know, having to respond to that quite quickly is being a big challenge. The way I'm trying to structure my conversations with my customers has kind of been, you know, boxing it up into the three pieces that you're seeing in front of you right now. And I guess it's just talking to customers around avenues to how do we manage their expenses, deferring and reducing. How do we look at their existing asset base and generate some cash from there? And then potentially looking at matching payments use, which is really giving our customers the ability to have some sort of consumption feel back into the way that they're utilizing technology. But, you know, being out in the sales and the sales force, you know, these are some of the things that myself personally I'm hearing, and some of my colleagues around the country. You know, these are things that we're hearing, challenges that we're hearing from our customers, and the scenarios. You know, hopefully some of these potentially may resonate with you as to what's happening in your own organization as well. And what I wanted to do in the next 5 minutes is just to kind of zoom into a couple of these, tie them back to some of those three boxes that we were talking about earlier, and just to give some insight about what the challenges are and how we can potentially assist our customers with them. So, you know, looking at defer as the first box, you can see some of those situations on the left. And really, you know, this is a situation where we've got with our customers where you potentially have already committed to some IT projects because of their criticality to your business, or it's in response to COVID-19 and enabling some of those learn from home, work from home challenges that needs to be addressed as well. But, you know, there's pressures on the organization to manage the cash flow. You know, obviously sometimes right now we're seeing that the cash coming in from fees could be impacted. So there's been restrictions on potentially CapEx spending or managing OpEx spending over, you know, the next few months or beyond as well. I guess my role with customers is to really understand what that financial outlook looks like, because it's a unique situation for each customer right now. You know, there's not a sort of a one size fits all type solution, but it's really understanding what that financial impact is going to be over the next, you know, next few months or beyond, and really understanding what the project timelines are for those IT projects that need to go in as well. You know, based on that understanding, we do have a couple of options that we are talking to our customers about right now. You know, one of them is looking at, initially it's just looking at, you know, deploy that solution in June, you know, get it all commissioned, but, you know, we skip July, August, September, and we look at picking up a payment stream from October. You know, that gives us, you know, 90 days to be able to give to our customers to have no commitment from a funding perspective, but, you know, be able to still leverage and get that technology in right now, which is the important piece. You know, sometimes our customers are looking for something beyond that as well. So we've got some programs that, you know, we can help alleviate some of the financial implications over the next, rest of this calendar year, and look in picking up payments from the beginning of 2021 on the new calendar year. You know, that would just be minimal payments for the rest of this year, and then, you know, coming back up to some standard payments from beyond. But I guess, you know, really it's just understanding what that financial pressure is, and for us to come up with a solution for our customers. And it could be a blend of both, right? And that's really, you know, where it's not necessarily a cookie cutter approach. The other point is to talk about how do we generate some cash from existing assets, right? So, you know, I've had some customers come to me that have just finished investing some large amounts of cash into some IT projects, and, you know, they're kind of looking at an avenue to be able to basically undo that transaction and get that cash back. And this could be a project that was done, you know, a few months ago. It could be a project that was done 12 months ago, right? But really, it's just that the cash has been tied up into those assets, but potentially that cash could be beneficial to have injected back in and be used in other parts of the business to address some of the other problems that they're trying to alleviate right now, which need the cash. So, you know, what we tend to do, this might be a familiar financial program for some of you, but it's essentially what's known as a sale and leaseback type program. Really all it is an asset ownership transfer. So we're essentially buying the assets back from our customers, and we're leasing them back to our customers. So nothing's actually moving, it's just paperwork. But what it's being able to do is undo those cash heavy transactions that may have occurred recently, and be able to inject that cash back into our customers. And if it's less than 3 months old, then we're being able to inject 100% of that cash flow back right in. If it's older than that, then we look at what the depreciated value is. But, you know, that's a discussion and that we can have as well. The other side to that coin is that if you've just completed an IT project and you've pulled out some old kit, but you haven't really figured out what the pathway for that is, that's a really good opportunity to share that list of equipment. It's not a really cumbersome exercise, but just get that list of equipment across to your Trident account managers who will be able to share it with us. We'll do an evaluation. It can be any vendor kit as well. It doesn't have to be HPE. We're happy to have a look at it and, leverage our reach into the secondary market on a global scale and see if we can potentially buy some of that kit back and inject some cash as well. That's something that we do for a big range of customers. And, any of those assets we are taking back, we're putting through our process of making sure that they've been sanitized from data as well, and being environmentally disposed of if we do need to dispose of them. So it's a good option to take a look at as well. The last piece is what we call match, and that's more around the consumption flavor. Maybe some of you are not being impacted just yet from just you don't need those economic relief pieces, but you might be looking at some large projects that you need to do over multiple term breaks, and you want to secure a large piece of stock into your environment right now. And that could be a large notebook rollout that some labs you need to update potentially over some multiple terms, but there's concerns around stock. Maybe the models are changing. There's obviously right now pricing is kind of going up and down just depending. So this solution enables us to be able to procure all of that stock on day one, assign a monthly cost per device, allow our customers to deploy, and then as it's being deployed, notify us and we increase the billing. So it gives you that, matching that usage to the payments. Again, there's this one I can go into a lot more detail around this one, but just as a high level, if that's something that would be beneficial for your business, then happy to have another conversation off the back of that.
Great, Raul, that's fantastic. Give us one thing, because we are going to have to wrap this up soon. Tell me the one thing that clients are asking for you the most from you right now.
Yeah, so right now it's actually just for us to come and understand what we can do for them, because if they've got their own set of economic pressures right now. Something that we are doing a lot of is how do we minimize the impact from an OPEX perspective over the next 3, 6, 9 months, and looking at different programs. That's been quite common right now to really address. And I'm just about to sort of wrap it up, Katie, as well, because I think from our perspective, it's just you've heard some sort of tease some of those solutions, but really it's just to have a conversation with us. Like reach out to your account managers, and I'm happy to jump on a Zoom call. We can have a virtual cup of coffee and kind of go through and see what's going to suit your business. It's not necessarily one solution that may work. We can look at blending them together and seeing what's going to essentially fit for you guys. So that's really all I wanted to kind of leave you all with. And again, I appreciate the time and everyone sort of jumping in this webinar and giving us your attention as well. So thank you for that, and I'll pass it back to you, Katie.
Thanks so much, Rahul. I know that in the many years that we've been dealing with HPE Finance, you're certainly an extremely flexible organisation. The turnover time is very, very fast to get the information to the customers. I know our sales team have always loved working with you guys. So thank you so much.
I appreciate it.
Today.
Thank you.
Next, I'm going to introduce you to Mr. Skol Lukatsky. He's the CEO of Spirit Telecom, and Jeff's my new boss. He's a C-suite executive with multiple company transactions across the ASICs and private equity-backed companies. He's a man that gets things done, but thinks about it first. I know that lots of you have met him over the last couple of months, and I would like you to welcome him, and you'll hear from him about what he's doing in this pandemic. Welcome, Sol.
Thanks, Katie, and I'd like to welcome everybody obviously to this call from a Spirit perspective. Thank you to Tim, thank you to Graham, and obviously Rahul. Thank you from HP for being part of this. It's been, I think, in the first hour, an amazing mix of different conversations around what's happening at a macroeconomic level from obviously Graham. Tim has probably the best view I've ever seen on a background, so well done, Tim. Just a couple of points from me, because I probably don't need to explain the rationale around why Spirit and Trident came together, because Tim did it in a nutshell. And when I looked at what we wanted to do as a strategy, it really has come to life with the organisations such as obviously Tim, Loretto, other schools that we do, both the high-speed interlinks together. So quite simply, the two organisations coming together, the rationale is around offering high-speed internet, then putting the over-the-top IT services through one organisation, through one account manager, through one service level agreement. In terms of who Spirit is, we're a small ASX listed company. So what you now have behind you is a really strong balance sheet. We're backed by CBA, we're backed by a number of institutional investors and high wealth, sophisticated investors on the register as well. At the same time, I think I've met a lot of you. Every time you speak to me, I email you straight back, and you can call me 24/7. So we offer the sophistication of being a small cap, but we offer the old school service of being able to talk to the CEO, who I was referred to as Mr. So thank you very much, Katie Bentley. Haven't been referred to as Mr. verbally, apart from documentation. So what key points are, we want to provide you with your high-speed links. We want to have a conversation around obviously the IT services, but we want to do it with old school service and people, not just any type of account manager. You can speak to Katie, you can speak to Jeff, and although the organisations are merged, the value systems behind those are around people, over communicating and being available 24/7. So it's not about the products at the end of the day, it's about the customers and around what we do. And obviously, I don't need to pitch it again because Tim's done it so beautifully, and I appreciate that, Tim. Well done and well sold. We'll send you an additional Uber Eats voucher in the mail as well. So thank you again. So look, welcome to Spirit. Welcome to Spirit and Trident together. And I will now hand over to Jeff, I think.
Okay, thanks everyone. As we also have to reiterate again, thanks HPE for your support over this. I think the forum went really, really well. I think what Graham, having someone like Graham Samuel speak to us, we're very fortunate. His optimistic outlook on how our economy is going to come out of this, where there is so much negative media hype that we're witnessing today, the economy may come a little bit faster than what expected. So that type of positive attitude and that message is we will all learn from it and prosper on. On Tim, Tim did start, he calls it as it is, very similar to a business manager down now, my neck of the woods. But Tim, Loretta and Trident have had a long-term relationship. It's all based around our pillars of strength, which is integrity, trust, and respect, and a lot of honesty. So Tim, thanks so much on that. And I do think, Tim, when that Spirit Link got into play, I thought I was leading that, not Sol. I thought I got that one across the line before Sol did. But, as what Katie and I now report to a boss, so we've got to give those accolades to our management moving forward. Lastly, what Sol discussed was the strategic, direction of our business moving forward. We've got a lot of, our business is actually growing through all this. We're doing quite well in some areas, and we've got a strategic outlook on where we're moving to as an organisation. And finally, this is a forum, the first of a few that we want to progress further on, and we'd love to hear your feedback. We'll send the survey and see what you think, where areas that you may want us to focus on in other directions. I would love to maybe in our next forum is look to the Brighton Way, where Graham has his beautiful house, and we spend a lot of our business hours down in the Brighton Way. Maybe hear from the Ross Featherstones and the Jennies from the Brighton and Furbank communities on what they're doing through this, and we'd love to hear from them. So we may reach out to you, Ross, very shortly. And finally, the people that won the bottles of wine do have a Brighton theme, and unfortunately there was nothing about that at all. It was Michael Arcieri, Scott Feehan, Jenny Dean and Ross Featherstone. So once again, thanks so much. We appreciate your support, and have a great day and weekend. Bye for now.